Oh, this top 5 is going to bring back a lot of great memories for longtime Cape Codders. For those of you that listen to the podcast that are not from Cape Cod or New England, you will probably not get any of these references. But for those of you that do, that lived on Cape Cod, grew up on Cape Cod in the 1980s, we're going to look back at some Cape Cod stores that we miss. I came up with so many on my own, and I also reached out on social media, and I had a lot of friends share some with me that helped to influence the actual top 5. But then the other names they gave, they ended up getting stuck in the honorable mentions. So you may disagree with my top 5 or have places I forgot. And although I can't spend forever on these, if there are any you want me to do deeper dives into, let me know. But when it comes to honorable mentions, you're in luck, because 2 of them have already been covered at length on the podcast in the past. So honorable mentions for Cape Cod businesses of the 1980s that we miss include Bradley's, which if you go back to episode 4, I did a whole long segment on it. Benny's, which if you go back to episode 27, I did a whole long segment on. But then there was also Dwyer's Books from Hyannis, which my Uncle John worked at, which is how I remember it. The Christie's convenience stores, which when I was a kid, they rivaled Cumberland Farms and 7-Eleven as far as exposure on Cape Cod. Bon Repose, which was a furniture store. Gott's Music in Yarmouth, which was naturally a music store. Colonial Candle of Cape Cod, which still exists, but not on Cape Cod, which is weird. Robert's 1 Hour Cleaner, which had a few locations on Cape Cod and was run by my great Uncle Roland, which is how I remember that place. And of course, the Head and Foot shop that you just heard me talk about in the time capsule. That is a lot of names right there. Do you remember any or all of them? Well, get ready, because we're going to jump into the actual top 5 right now. Starting with number 1, Cotton Pickin' Tees. They were in existence roughly from 1974 to 1992 in Hyannis, a t-shirt shop on the corner of Route 28 and Willow Street. They were in a brick building that would later be occupied by Cam Appliance. This company may end up getting a deeper dive by me, because in doing the research for this segment, I forgot how big they were. They were making upwards of 1 million t-shirts a year and did shirts for the 1980 Olympics. They were owned by a man named Paul Kodrowskis and were a giant of Cape Cod business when they were around. Number 2 is Butner's Department Store. They had 3 locations on Cape Cod in Hyannis on Main Street, Harwich, and Sandwich. I have very few memories of Butner's, which is weird because they existed for a long time. They were open roughly from 1923 to 1992. They ended up also having locations on Nantucket Island and a big one in Plymouth. People that shopped at Butner's said it was kind of like having a small J.C. Penney that was local. To give you another 80s reference, the company was started by a man named Edward Augustus Butner. And I guess for those of the younger generation that are from Cape Cod, it would be kind of like Puritan clothing. And they're still around too, so they kind of started at the same time as Butner's. Number 3 is a more recent one, Dick and Ellie's Flea Market. This was in operation from about 1976 to 2015. They started right near the Rotary in Mashpee, and actually Dick and Ellie Weisel had a mini golf course, driving range, and the flea market was kind of part of that. In the early 2000s, they moved to this plot of open land near Patriot Square in Dennis, and it was a flea market, a giant flea market, open typically weekends in the summer, but it was huge. If you go by Theopolis Smith Road, it's behind Cumberland Farms, next to the Cape Cod Rail Trail parking lot. It's a monstrous open area that's kind of overgrown now. That was where Dick and Ellie's was. Interest in flea markets kind of waned in the 2010s, which is why they ended up closing. Number 4 is Clothes Quarters. They were open roughly from 1976 to 1991. They had 5 locations on Cape Cod: Hyannis, West Harwich, Orleans, West Yarmouth, and Falmouth. The company was owned by a man named James Shanley. They were referred to as an off-price clothing store. I would guess kind of akin to Marshall's or TJ Maxx. I will try to find logos or pictures of these places to share on social media if that interests any of you. One thing I noticed with these places I chose is the timing of their demise, and I'll tie it all together after we give you one last place, and that's number 5, Robinson's 5 and 10. A 5 and 10 was a 5 and 10 cent store where theoretically everything would be priced for a nickel or a dime. Robinson's was open from roughly 1957 to 1995. At their peak, they had 6 locations on Cape Cod and southeastern Mass, Orleans, Harwichport, Middleborough, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and South Yarmouth. The South Yarmouth one is the one I remember. It was located in the plaza on Route 28 where Ocean State Job Lot is now. It was a little bit down from where Job Lot would be because Job Lot used to be Angelo's. But again, the 5 and 10 cent store, that was a relic of the past, so it was only natural that that would be phased out. One thing I noticed, and something that I may have to do a segment on in a future podcast, is the timing of the demise of a lot of Cape Cod legendary businesses. If you notice, just in this top 5, 4 of the 5 places went out of business in the early 1990s. And that was also the case for a lot of restaurants, nightclubs, and bars and such. So it was sort of a changing of the guard. But there you have it. Top 5 1980s Cape Cod stores that we miss. Do you remember these? Do you miss these? Cotton Pick and Tees, Butner's Department Store, Dick and Ellie's Flea Market, Clothes Quarters, and Robinson's 5 and 10. Like I said, if you want any deep dives into these, let me know. Cotton Pick and Tees might get one. But I'll be back next week with a brand new top 5, likely about things that appeal to a wider variety of my listeners rather than just us that grew up on Cape Cod in the 1980s.